In October 1946, Sergeant John Clarence Woods had reasons to feel proud. Despite a mediocre military career, in 1944 he volunteered to become the executioner for executions ordered by the United States Armed Forces. Although his credentials as an executioner were completely false, he claimed to have experience in Texas and Oklahoma. He had never been near a gallows or an electric chair. His lack of scruples did not prevent him from being appointed to the job. His appointment as executioner quickly promoted him to Master Sergeant, and in 1946, he would be given the opportunity to enter history, as he was entrusted with carrying out the executions of the Nazi leaders convicted in the Nuremberg trials. If you're a history lover, subscribe now so you don't miss out on the most fascinating updates from the world. From that moment on, Woods would not only carry out the execution of the sentences, but he would make them far more painful than necessary. He had decided to give the condemned a macabre surprise, so that their final moments would be of indescribable suffering. While the executions were being prepared, Woods ordered the ropes to be too short, so that the Nazis would not die instantly, but would slowly die from asphyxiation. The Nuremberg trials. Historical context. Between November 1945 and October 1946, the International Military Tribunal tried the main leaders of the Third Reich for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during World War II. During the trials, devastating testimonies were presented about the concentration camps, the atrocities committed, and the horrors suffered by millions of people. Many of the accused tried to defend themselves by claiming they did not know the extent of the crimes or that they were simply following Hitler's orders. The defense was weak and the tribunal was inflexible with the accused. Eventually, the sentences were handed down and 12 Nazi leaders were sentenced to death by hanging. However, some of the accused were not executed. Hermann Göring, one of the main Nazi leaders, committed suicide by ingesting a cyanide capsule the day before his execution. Another, Martin Bormann, had died while trying to escape the advance of Allied troops and was sentenced in absentia. The executions. On October 16, 1946, a gallows was set up in the yard of the Nuremberg prison. The execution of the Nazi leaders was about to be carried out, and Woods would be the one in charge of adjusting the rope for each of the condemned. The method of execution would be the long drop, a technique that consisted of calculating the length of the rope according to the weight of each condemned man, so that the neck would break instantly. But Woods had decided to change the rules of the game and designed a much slower and more painful execution. Joachim von Ribbentrop. The first condemned man to be sent to the gallows was Joachim von Ribbentrop, the Third Reich's foreign minister. Von Ribbentrop was accused of being responsible for the atrocities committed in Denmark and France. During his trial, he tried to defend himself by claiming that his decisions were dictated by Hitler and that his only desire was to seek international peace. However, he never renounced his loyalty to the Führer. In his last words before being hanged, von Ribbentrop said, "God protect Germany and take care of my soul. I hope my country regains unity and that, for the sake of world peace, there is understanding between East and West." He was hanged slowly, just as Woods had planned. Wilhelm Keitel. The next to be executed was Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Armed Forces High Command. In his trial, Keitel acknowledged that Hitler's orders were illegal, but justified his obedience due to the oath of loyalty he had sworn to Hitler. Although he asked to be executed by firing squad, his request was denied and he was sentenced to die by hanging. Before dying, Keitel said, "I ask Almighty God to have mercy on the Germans. More than 2 million of our soldiers marched to their deaths for their homeland, and now it is my turn to follow their path." As he fell through the trapdoor, he hit his head and was strangled while bleeding from the wound. Ernst Kaltenbrunner. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, one of the main members of the SS and responsible for war crimes committed in Europe, was also sentenced to death. During his trial, Kaltenbrunner tried to justify his role by claiming he was simply following orders. He showed no remorse at any time. He was hanged by Woods, who had also planned a slower execution. Alfred Rosenberg. Alfred Rosenberg, one of the main ideologists of Nazism, was next to be executed. During his trial, Rosenberg was completely defiant. When asked if he had any last words, he responded simply, no, he was hanged immediately. Hans Frank. Hans Frank, former governor of Poland during the Nazi occupation, was one of the few who showed true remorse for his crimes. Frank voluntarily handed over his 43 personal diaries to the tribunal, and it was thanks to these writings that the evidence that condemned him was found. In his last words before being hanged, he thanked his captors for having treated him decently and asked God to have mercy on his soul. He was executed slowly by Woods. Wilhelm Frick. Wilhelm Frick, former Minister of the Interior, was another of those sentenced to the gallows. Frick was convicted for his involvement in the regime's crimes and for his role in the formulation of racial laws. Before his execution, he showed signs of nervousness and was the condemned man who stumbled the most while climbing the gallows steps. Julius Streicher. Julius Streicher, known for his role as a Nazi propagandist, was also sentenced to death. Although he did not have a direct role in war crimes, Streicher was one of the main promoters of hatred toward Jews. As he was taken to the gallows, he shouted, "Heil Hitler!" and cursed the Jews. During his execution, Streicher remained defiant, and before dying he shouted, "All of you will be hanged by the Bolsheviks." Woods let him die slowly, prolonging his suffering. Alfred Jodl. Alfred Jodl, chief of the Armed Forces High Command, was also sentenced to death. In his trial, Jodl claimed that he was simply following orders. However, his responsibilities in the planning of war crimes were clear, and he was executed by hanging. Martin Bormann. Although Martin Bormann, one of Hitler's closest men, was not captured until after the end of the war, he was sentenced in absentia. Bormann had died while trying to escape Allied troops. However, his trial and death sentence in absentia reflect the impact of his role in the Nazi regime. Karl Donitz. Karl Donitz, commander of the Nazi Navy, was sentenced to 10 years in prison, although his actions during the war were not as atrocious as those of others. He was one of the few who was not executed. The Nuremberg executions, orchestrated under the direction of John Clarence Woods, marked the end of an era of impunity for the leaders of the Third Reich. Although Woods was never punished for the cruelty of his methods, his decision to prolong the suffering of the condemned became one of the darkest aspects of the justice carried out after World War II. The last words of these Nazi leaders and the suffering they were subjected to before dying will serve as a reminder of the atrocities they committed, but also as a lesson about the price of justice when the line of vengeance is crossed. Don't forget to subscribe and comment on what topic you'd like us to explore in future videos.